The National Security Agency, or NSA, was first established in 1952, and Edward Snowden recently brought to light evidence showing that the super-secret spy agency has been listening into the conversations of ordinary Americans by the millions. The NSA has had a history of running into public controversy over their surveillance programs. Back in 1972, an 11-member Senate committee uncovered evidence that the agency had been spying on ordinary Americans without warrants. Their targets back then, like the IRS scandal of today, included political opponents and dissidents as well as anti-war protesters. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978 set up a special court through which intelligence agencies could obtain warrants which could not be issued through a traditional court. Starting in the early 1980s, and especially in the weeks and months following 9/11, restrictions were lifted on how the government could intercept communications without a warrant. The plight of governmental whistleblower Edward Snowden has brought the debate about the legitimate powers of such spy agencies to the forefront of public discussion. Our guest today, Richard Grove, first made a name for himself as a corporate whistleblower a decade ago. Welcome back, Richard, to WHDT World News.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for inviting me back again.
Now, Richard, you wrote the movie State of Mind, The Psychology of Control. I should say you co-wrote it. And in it, you make the case that there exists a small group of people in control of governments nationwide. Could you tell us a little bit about who you believe is actually at the controls of governments around the world and how you came to uncover these findings?
Well, the great thing about what I've learned is that other people had discovered this before me. So really, I wouldn't be talking about anything original that I've discovered. I read some books. And it just so happens that there's some very credible books by authors like Carol Quigley or Dr. Anthony Sutton, or even more recently by Oxford professor Neil Ferguson. And what you can learn about the true nature of World War I and World War II and the Cold War is a very different story than what we're given in public schools here in America. And so what you see is, the overall summary of that history is that after America fought for its freedom against Britain, the empire never forgets, and the British slowly indoctrinated us with their culture such that they formed an Anglo-American establishment in the 20th century. And it was based around a very famous, or I hope to be more famous, secret society that's told in the story of Tragedy and Hope, The History of the World in Our Time by Carol Quigley.
Now tell us a little bit about your role in the companies where you were working in 2003 and the information that you uncovered concerning the coming fiscal crash, and what surprised you most about being a whistleblower?
Well, what surprised me most about being a whistleblower is that the activities that I encountered in the corporate world were, again, very much distinct and different and contrastingly shocking to what I was taught about in college. So I hadn't read many books at the time, and kind of the reason I got interested in reading a lot of good history books 10 years ago was that what I encountered in selling regulatory software that was mandated by our Congress to protect the citizens of this country from financial fraud, that software had a backdoor that allowed massive amounts of illicit trading, money laundering, all sorts of caustic fiscal activities that led up to the current and ongoing depression. So when I blew the whistle and went through channels and went to court and went to the journalistic community out there, the so-called journalistic community, I was very, again, shocked and disappointed at the lack of regulatory oversight, because the people that I warned at the SEC actually standardized on the product on which I blew the whistle. So they knew it had a backdoor in it, and they found that they could use that to their own devices without bringing that to the public, which I thought was unfair. So I sacrificed my career. I had a very good living at the time, and I didn't know much about history, and it's because I didn't know about that history that I bought into the fact that they were saying, and I was educating clients on Sarbanes-Oxley, that you had whistleblower protection because this is, federally regulated software that's mandated to protect the country. It's a national security device. And when I found out that that national security device had a backdoor in it, that's like a prophylactic with a hole in it. It is not keeping you safe, even though you might think it is at the time. You're going to find out later that you didn't get that situation knowingly, and that somebody's purposely poking holes in our software that's supposed to keep the country safe, and the regulatory agencies that are supposed to keep us safe, and the so-called corporate media outlets that are supposed to tell you. This happened 10 years ago, so this is not news unless you're just hearing about it and you haven't searched these things out on the web. But what I can say is this information should have reached the public about 2004, And to this day, most people have no idea what I'm talking about.
So what was the outcome of you blowing the whistle on that?
The outcome was, after many years of going through the channels and going through various levels of presenting evidence and going to court and proving my case in court, undisputed by, you know, I sued one of the largest companies in the world, a multi-billion-dollar company, and they had the world's largest attorney, you know, legal firm representing them. So to go in there and present all this evidence on the record and have the evidence of the day and no one's contradicting what I'm saying, and then to just have it dismissed as, you blew the whistle and what you said was true, but it was outside of the statute of limitations, and so it goes no further. And that's when I went to Lowell Bergman at PBS, who likewise worked on the story for 2 years, said it's factual and credible, but we can't print this. It's against their interests.
Wow, that's amazing. So PBS wouldn't even air it?
They wouldn't air it, and they wouldn't go beyond the research phase. But that took 2 years, and Lowell Bergman had a team of 2 editors working on it. And so there was, you know, hope. For many, many years, I had hope that, you know, just doing the right thing was going to work out. And really, what I had to learn was how to be self-reliant and build self-esteem on my knowledge and experience. And to do that, I had to start asking questions about my reality and start questioning the assumptions that I'd based my life around, because the decisions I made to make a healthy living before I was 30 were soon lost. And by the time I was 33, I really just had to, you know, step back and do a lot of education for the first time, because when we're taught in public schools, they teach us with declarative sentences, and learning comes from question marks. And so you should ask why there's not more question marks in public schooling. And what you'll find is they want to create servants.
Well, let's go into the next topic here, because through the course of American history, the federal government has passed several laws which persecute those opposed to American policies. And some of those best known were the Alien and Sedition Act, Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus, and the McCarthy hearings of the 1950s. Could you tell us what changes in national surveillance policies have had the greatest impact on liberties in the United States throughout our nation's history?
Well, I really think the Alien and Sedition Act, you know, there was another act around 1917, 1918. But these are, you know, really, I mean, it goes all the way back to George Washington if you really want to get into the history. But in the 20th century, things that are relevant to people who are living today, what you see is a policy of starting to suppress journalists and to censor stories that were inconvenient to the truths, quote unquote truths, that the government was trying to, you know, throw out there to build support for a war, which it very much wanted and benefited from, along with its British partners. So when you see the story of World War I through Versailles and you move up through World War II, I mean, there's the Red Scares and there's this communist element, but really what they were talking about goes unidentified. When JFK is talking about secret societies in his speech, he's not referring to communism, as many people would try to have you believe. Don't believe that hype. What you have to ask is, which secret societies have secret oaths? Because if you read that speech by JFK right shortly before he died, or if you listen to it, because it's on tape, you can listen to it, and you can identify the key words that he's laying it out there, but he at that time was too scared to even speak the name of the secret society that he was talking about. So what you need to understand is that there's a deeper level of history, that History Channel is no longer purveying history out there, which is why I created a show called History, so it doesn't repeat.
So let me ask you this, what secret society was JFK speaking of then?
Well, I think you would have to look deeper into history, and this isn't my belief. I don't express beliefs, I just reflect what I've seen on the evidentiary landscape that's out there, the archives and the records that are out there. So again, I would point to scholars like Anthony Sutton or Carol Quigley, and what you're looking at is called the Anglo-American Establishment. It's out of the Cecil Rhodes' Last Will and Testament. So Cecil Rhodes was an Oxford graduate funded by Lord Rothschild or Baron Rothschild back in the 1860s to go to South Africa to initiate apartheid and concentration camps and gold and diamond mining. The cartel, the worldwide cartel known as De Beers, which is a monopoly and cannot operate legally in America, was the company of Cecil Rhodes, which he left back to the Rothschilds and created the Rhodes Scholarships, which operates out of All Souls College in Oxford. And so what you see is that there's a ruling, educated elite that have been following the Last Will and Testament of Cecil John Rhodes since his death in 1902, which specified the creation of a worldwide secret society to make the British Empire a global power, to use America as the tip of the spear. And so when Churchill comes to us in World War II and he says, hey, we can't beat Germany without America, they lose their world empire as Britain, but they gain the world through America. And that's been their plan, and it has gone much through the 20th and 21st century unopposed and unknown about.
Fascinating discussion.
That's why I named my operation Tragedy and Hope, because if you're going to have a media operation that gives out commercial-free media to the public, and it's based in history, the single thread of history that you can follow through here is in one book. Now, it's a big book, and I could recommend some books that are entry-level books to help you understand what's in Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time. But essentially, that is a book with so many connections that go out to a verifiable, coherent reality that this is a finite planet. There is only so many people with this agenda, and here's the history of that. And it really was written for an elite upper class in this country. And when Macmillan found it was being published to the public, Macmillan had a new owner at that time, and they destroyed the plates of the book. And Quigley himself says it was a conspiracy. And in his 1974 interview with Rudy Maxa, I believe it is, from the New York Times, he elaborates how they lied to him and told him that, it was out of circulation or this sort of thing, but not that they had destroyed the plates. They said it was out of print and they didn't have enough orders to put it back in print. So even Quigley himself, recognizes that this is a conspiracy beyond his grasp at the time in 1966 when he wrote this famous textbook.
Now let's shift gears to the NSA, because many people are now becoming aware of how commonly that they are actually being listened to by the NSA and other agencies and corporations. Many people don't even seem fazed by the evidence unearthed by Edward Snowden. What do you think these people would be most surprised to learn about the actions of that agency's functions or other agencies that are doing eavesdropping?
Well, first off, I think that as a whistleblower, it's common knowledge, I think, that our worst fear is not, running up against the opposition or death or any of those things. It's that the information we'll disclose, or we have disclosed, goes out there and people don't change their behavior. After Snowden says, here's the slides, it shows Microsoft, Yahoo, Skype, all these companies that you know and trust and share your private data with your passwords, everything. They have unlimited access. If you don't change your behavior after being faced with that situation, they kind of know they got us on the ropes. Because look, we can tell people that they're being spied on and they're not changing their behavior. But in truth, it goes back to about 1974, a great interview with Russell Tice. There's several interviews with Russell Tice who explains, look, here's the pattern of action from 1974 to 2013 and how they've escalated in technology. But really, you could go back to 1968, 69, and 70, when Zbigniew Brzezinski is writing his book Between Two Ages, America and the Technotronic Age, and that means the post-industrial world. They were planning out what would they need to do to harness all these human resources who are no longer needed in industrial society. And they said, we need to collect a lot of information, we need to develop a lot of technology. So the cybernetics that Brzezinski is talking about in 1970 that attracted, David Rockefeller to say, hey, be my partner and create the Trilateral Commission to bring about this world government. So there's all these different working groups, but that plan has been steadily progressing, and the inclusion of cybernetics, the smart grid, any type of technology that's collecting information on you is dangerous, and let me tell you why. When I worked in 2003 for a company called Panacea, P-A-N-A-C-Y-A, we sold artificial intelligence software to the world's largest financial institutions to watch over, to spy on everything in their grid, to tell them before a server would crash, and these sort of trivial things to people playing at home. But in reality, when our government is developing through private companies this artificial intelligence software, what is its purpose? It needs a lot of data to chew on, to learn from, and to accurately predict the future. Oh, let's give it some food sources like Google, Facebook, Twitter, all these social media networks that have been stealing our data. That they have the technology and the intelligence community certainly beyond the capacity of a little private company that had 30 people that I worked at. So you have to ask the question. They've been developing this technology far before 9/11, before the terrorist threats, right? So you have to ask the question, is all this budgetary money going to defense and keeping us safe and intelligence community spying on us? Is all that to keep us safe from terrorists? Or could it be to surveil human resources, to predict our behavior, to control us so that we could be used in some very anti-America agendas, very anti-American agendas around the world?
You recently made a film called The Psychology of Control. What inspired you to make that film, and what is your primary goal in creating the film?
Well, the first thing I have to say is it's a co-production between our organization, Tragedy and Hope, and Free Mind Films, who had made OKC 1995, about the Murrah Federal Building being bombed. So it was their second production. They had me on the list of people to interview for the film because I had done a great deal of research and reading into outside of MK Ultra, how this all, MK Ultra, in my opinion, in State of Mind, MK Ultra is featured. It's just a sub-project of the CIA, and what I focus on is the CIA and the folks who funded and used the CIA as their private police force. So from a historical perspective, after they interviewed me, they decided that the movie was much broader than they had first scoped out, and they wanted to include this other information about Cecil Rhodes and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Pilgrim Society, and touch on some of these working groups so that people could see MK Ultra is not just something that they did in the past to other people with electrodes and black and white films. It is very much in action today, because what they learned from those activities have taken on other covert forms through surveillance to collect the activity of human beings, to build psychological profiles on them, to know how to make them submit, to apply pressure in various ways without sticking a gun in your face. And so they're just refining their art of controlling us like automatons. And really what we can do to fight back, the message of the movie is to put question marks in your mind and start asking questions, finding substantial answers, because that can break up the stimulus response operant conditioning that psychological warfare depends on. And so if you think you're being exposed to propaganda, you have to start asking questions.
Well, Richard, let's talk about that, the propaganda, the conditioning, because John Taylor Gatto and a growing number of people now believe that the purposes of mandatory public education is actually to dumb down the population, not to educate the masses. What would you say to those who make the case that such compulsory public education is necessary in an increasingly technological world?
I would say congratulations for asking a great question. Here's an excellent answer. It's not the belief of John Taylor Gatto. It's John who went out and read through 500 books of the past 200 years to find out what are the.
Richard, let me jump in there real quick.
Okay.
For our viewers, could you tell them who John Taylor Gatto is, please?
John Taylor Gatto was one of the most famous school teachers in the world. He was twice awarded the New York City and New York State School Teacher of the Year award. He also resigned famously on the op-ed page of the Wall Street Journal, saying that he refused to hurt children through the schooling system, through the Prussian education system that creates servants and slaves and not free individuals who know how to think for themselves and solve their own problems. So instead of being a school teacher who was creating autonomous individuals, they wanted him, as a school teacher who creates autonomous individuals, to sit inside a system that breaks individuals, and to use him as marketing to say, look, this system works. Look at what he does with kids from Harlem and these other kids that were so-called underprivileged who are doing Shakespeare plays, right? Things that were in the school system beyond their capacity. He's like, no, these kids have the capacity. And so after being frustrated, he blew the whistle, I think it was in 1991 or 1992, and started writing books. His most famous is The Underground History of American Education. It is a must-have. If you have children and they are in the school system, you have to have this book. The video version of that we called The Ultimate History Lesson with John Taylor Gatto. It's a 5-hour DVD set that we filmed in the studio here, and he lays out a lifetime of work. So if you don't think that you can handle a book right now, you can handle a video and watch it 1 hour at a time and start to take in this history, and that'll give you the interest. It'll spark your curiosity to get the book and find out more, because that's what life's about. We're in a classroom. This is a continuous learning curriculum, and it's only when we refuse to learn the lessons that are being taught that we encounter chaos and disorder in our lives.
Now let's talk about media. The role of mass media. What role do you see the mass media playing in the subterfuge necessary to establish and maintain the kind of power that the so-called, if you will, shadow government has achieved? And can citizen journalism on the web overcome the flow of possibly biased information from official sources that, when I say official sources, I mean corporate sources like ABC, CBS, NBC, USA Today?
Well, that again is a great question. I'm going to take the second part first. I'm going to say citizen journalism, independent journalism, is the only way to handle this problem, because here's my example. In 1918, United States Congressman Oscar Callaway said on congressional record that 25 of the largest print news companies in America were controlled by this roundtable group that I described before, a function of Cecil Rhodes' last will and testament. Now, that was 1918. You could say that's a long time ago. I don't know about that. Well, let's go to something we're familiar with. Operation Mockingbird went from the 1950s into the 1970s. it involved Ben Bradley and Eugene Meyer and Katharine Graham of the Washington Post and Cord Meyer, who was the son of the owner of the Washington Post. And so when you look into something like Operation Mockingbird, which is featured in State of Mind, The Psychology of Control, when you get into that, just read the Wikipedia page. Your mind will be blown that the CIA was playing America like a Wurlitzer organ. In fact, there's a great book from Harvard by Hugh Wilford called The Mighty Wurlitzer, How the CIA Played America. And it describes how the CIA undermined feminism and used TV and media propaganda to shape America in an image which was very un-American and to make people love their servitude the whole time.
Now let's shift gears to Syria. Okay, President Obama has made no secret of his support for the rebels in Syria. We've even seen photographs with John McCain posing with alleged Al-Qaeda rebels. Now reports have American missiles and other supplies heading to the rebel forces there, supplied by the Central Intelligence Agency. What kind of dealings do you imagine are going on behind the scenes to supply such equipment, and why do you think that our government is supporting rebel forces that include alleged Al-Qaeda members?
Well, I think it would probably be irresponsible for me to share on air what I imagine. It's not really relevant to anybody, but here's the facts. The group we know as Al-Qaeda that's leading this global war on terror is a front group for the Anglo-American establishment. It always has been. It's been run by the CIA and MI6, and there's tons of history on it. It's very fascinating. We could get into that in a whole nother show. But this whole deal with Syria, again, the CIA comes in because what you find out is after the Benghazi attack and after I watched the C-SPAN testimonies and learned as much as I could about it to form an objective, accurate opinion, or at least be able to demonstrate through evidence, what you find is that the security team guarding our ambassador at our embassy were Libyan nationals who were part of Al-Qaeda. They had high levels of security knowledge, such as they could breach the safe room in the embassy. So it's evidently, if you compare it to history, it's an assassination using a proxy force. And why would they do that? Well, there just happened to be this big storehouse of weapons and Stinger missiles, and the CIA was providing this to Al-Qaeda in Syria, but they don't want you to know that. So they're going to call that national security for a while until, they released it this week. It's now official. It's out in the open. But they don't want to release that at the same time that you're going through, Ambassador Chris Stevens losing his family and the 6 other people or 5 other people that were killed. And, and it could even be worse because who knows if we were told the correct death toll numbers. And so when you get into the national security response to that situation, like we had drones flying above the scene to videotape it, and we had personnel in country, but they're not going to go over there and help out. So it's very much a case like the USS Liberty, where United States had leaked information back to Britain, which the Israelis didn't like because the British still had Arab partners at that time. And so it's a complex situation. And any of these need to be studied. And this is something, it's like introducing you to what's going on. You are part of this history. You are living on this planet. And so I think it's imperative that every responsible adult start to look into these things because they are meaningful to the decisions you make right now and going forward about your family.
Now let's shift gears back to surveillance and technology. How do you see surveillance changing over the next few years and decades? Will it become more common, or will there be a pullback caused by public opposition to the widespread practice of warrantless surveillance?
Well, I would love to see a widespread pullback, but that would have to start with an educated population that can tell fact from fiction and learn how to sniff out this propaganda and ask questions to get away from it, because that's the only way you're going to think that the surveillance is not a good thing, because everyone tells you, oh, this is a good thing and it's going to make your life more convenient. And they sell you on all these points that are irrelevant when they made these devices to spy on us. Those are the marketing points to get you to accept it, to get you to pay for it, to get you to continually upgrade it so that they can have closer and closer contact with you through that. And they provide you a couple trivial, oh, look, you can find your location instantly. Look, find your this, that stuff is not meaningful. And like Neil Postman, he's a great author who did a lot of work on the questions of what is this technology doing to our culture? You have to ask the question, every time a new technology is adopted, one is pushed out, and what is being lost when you push out the book in favor of the Kindle? And Kindle is how you start a fire, and fires burn books. And so there's a whole underlying joke going on that people are consuming all these things, and we're kind of forced to because they become ubiquitous in our culture. But without understanding the nature of what they're trying to do, to edit history, to control history, to delete words out of our vernacular that lead people to cognitive liberty and freedom, that is very much going on. That's not just a business plan of Orwell or Huxley back in the 30s or 40s. That is very much in process today. It's very credible, and all people have to do is start reprioritizing some of their time, their habitual time that they're wasting every day, and start building some knowledge, such as I try to do every day, just bit by bit. It's interesting, it's fascinating, it doesn't seem like work, and it helps you live your life in a more non-contradictory way.
Now, Richard, one of the primary mechanisms for change in a democracy or republic is supposed to be voting. If you don't like policies, you're supposed to be able to change your leaders. But if a group of mega corporations and non-governmental organizations really holds the reins of power, or even the technology at the touchscreen voting booths, what can be done for the people to regain control of our destinies?
Well, again, if you're interested in voting and elections, let's look into that process. I would investigate the Electoral College, because really what it means is the people who vote for president don't know you, and they're not necessarily counting your vote. They're going to vote irrespective because they've been chosen to be there. Special people are in the Electoral College, and we're not in it. So I think it's kind of trivial to go out and participate in something where there's no cause and effect left. They've broken the chain of cause and effect between your vote and the result of the presidency. So take that extra time that you would spend supporting one of these broken candidates that represent non-views at this point of America. They're very much internationalists. Their goal is to suck the wealth of this country and to use this country and to dirty and sully its reputation and to counter out any integrity that we had ever built in the 1900s or in the 1700s. The 20th century and the 21st century are wiping that clean, and now America is seen in history as a gangster, an imperialist, trying to build an empire for a group of people who we thought we beat in 1776, but slowly but surely, they took over our country, again, through a back door. They didn't do it through military means, they did it through economic and political means.